Order in the court.
Melanie, are you ready for questions?
Judges, over to you.
Ms. Lane, I have a question. It seems to me as I look at the record, this traffic stop took a very dramatic turn when the officer pulled his gun. And as I understand it, the officer pulled his gun because the driver put on his blinker. That's the sequence. The blinker goes on, and so the officer pulls his gun.
The blinker was on and then the car started to move, and then afterwards the officer decided to move into, try to step into the car to prevent Mr. Brooks from leaving.
But if I'm reading the record correctly, and again, that sequence is blinker goes on, so officer pulls gun to direct the driver to stop. That strikes me as a very significant and perhaps disproportionate escalation. And does that not bear into the analysis as to, was the officer reasonable here? It seems to me that he kind of created the scenario that caused him to believe that he was in danger.
Well, in this case, he was actually in danger because he was hanging out of an accelerating car. And in that situation, well, yes, pulling out a gun may be a little bit, it's definitely dangerous to pull out a gun at anybody, but he had no choice because he had to kind of save his life because he was hanging out in an accelerating vehicle. And that's just a very dangerous situation. And there was no other way he could have tried to stop because even when he fired the first few shots, the car continued to accelerate. So there was nothing he could have actually done. And in that situation, he kind of used his human instinct to kind of determine what he should do best in that situation because he was in such severe danger.
May I respond?
Sure.
In Tennessee versus Garner, the court realizes that an officer does not have the ability to take the life of an individual or use deadly force when someone is trying to escape, especially if they're not posing an imminent danger of threat to the officer or to others. But in our case, it's clear that the same thing is occurring. Mr. Brooks was not presenting any imminent danger or threat to Officer Franklin at the moment where he was in the car and he turned the blinker back on. In fact, if Mr. Brooks had decided to drive away, it was within Officer Franklin's reason to decide that he would let Mr. Brooks escape and then continue on. That way he could jot down his license plate and later arrest him. However, he escalated the situation by jumping onto the doorframe of the car, which is completely unreasonable. We know that the Supreme Court itself has said that officers should allow these individuals to escape. And we don't want to create situations where a young boy, first instance in Tennessee versus Garner, ends up dead because he stole a purse that had $10 in it, or a case such as Graham versus Connor, where we see a diabetic man rushes immediately out of a store and officers immediately assume that this man is dangerous. We see that in both cases, officers are overly confident that they can make these decisions without thinking through them, and they recklessly end up using deadly force or extreme force that is excessive against these individuals. And we don't want to see that happen here again today.
But here, Counselor, is it reckless for the police officer who thinks that they smell marijuana in a car to stop someone who said that they have a gun within the vehicle, and then when they instructed them to get out of the vehicle, the lights go off, turn on, and they respond, at least in what seems to be a similar manner in terms of raising a gun when they believe a gun is on the person's, on or near the person they're looking to apprehend.
Your Honor, if we look at all of the facts in totality, as the court should eventually adopt a totality of circumstances test, we see that immediately when Officer Franklin approaches Mr. Brooks, Officer Franklin explains that Mr. Brooks complies, pulls over, he looks for his registration papers, and he stops when Officer Franklin tells him to, and then he also opens up his trunk. Once we get to the moment where Officer Franklin asks Mr. Brooks to step outside of the car, we see at that moment, Mr. Brooks then turns back his car on, and Officer Franklin immediately reacts by pointing a gun at Mr. Brooks. Whether or not Officer Franklin believed he saw a gun in that situation, there's no indication of that in the fact pattern. because he does not mention hearing the sound of a gun, seeing Mr. Brooks rummaging for a gun. So this is a drastic assumption that Officer Franklin made, which is dangerous in this case. And we know that under the moment of threat, while I do believe we would still win, our case is much stronger with the totality of circumstances because it's clear that Officer Franklin escalated the situation.
Yes, Bob, and even under the totality of circumstances, I mean, not all factors need to be weighed evenly, presumably. And whatever happened up to the point that the moment of threat takes place, given the heat of the moment, given that none of us are in a position to sort of put ourselves in that situation, don't officers need some leeway in order to do their jobs, to assess the threat to themselves and to the public at that particular moment?
The totality of circumstances test does not the totality of circumstances test recognizes that officers make mistakes. However, they do make unreasonable mistakes as well. Some that are in some ways deliberate and intentional. And those mistakes are the ones that we examine under the totality of circumstances. We know that the actions that Officer Franklin took in this specific case were not reasonable at all because he escalated the situation to the point where he had to use a gun in close proximity to Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Counsel. This is a question for both of you. How should the court consider Officer Franklin's tenure, the fact that he's relatively new to the police force?
The court should consider Officer Franklin's tenure as a sign that officers must be relying on their training. Their training must be improved because as officers have a duty to protect the citizens of this country, and they also must know the rules and standards that exist. They must ensure that they're not acting on their instincts immediately at all moments. Even in those high stress and high intensity moments, they must think through what they're doing. And so officer training must improve. But then also to that point, looking at Officer Franklin's relative newness to this whole situation, we see that Officer Franklin is acting impulsively. And this reckless behavior is what ends up putting Mr. Brooks in a situation where he has a gunshot to his chest and he now has memory loss.
Your Honor, as for Officer Franklin's tenure, he is relatively new in the force as he's only been there for 5 months. So it makes sense that he doesn't have much experience in that situation and that he did what he felt was right in that situation. And also up to now, he has had a clean disciplinary record. So Officer Franklin that means a clean disciplinary record means that he hasn't had any certain situations that will show that he is impulsive or that he makes really bad decisions. It's only up to this point, this really specific situation, where he's actively in danger that he made this decision. So, yeah.
Thank you. Doesn't the argument that a newer officer gets more leeway go against the public good?
Well, in this case, Officer Franklin isn't getting leeway because if this court does adopt the moment of threat doctrine, let's say like the officer doesn't actually pose a threat to the person, and then the person is perceived to be a threat, then the court will rule in favor of the person who the officer used excessive force against. But even if this court doesn't use the moment of threat doctrine and they use the totality of circumstances doctrine, Officer Franklin would still be reasonable in his decisions and his actions because of the whole interaction, like how he was respectful in the whole encounter, and he only used deadly force when he was in imminent life-threatening danger.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
Officers should not be getting leeway because of the fact that they have to protect our communities. And the moment of threat doctrine specifically provides that leeway for officers to escalate events to the point of which they are dangerous and they can then use force to respond. We don't want officers to have this leeway because when we see cases like Espinosa versus San Francisco, these officers may decide to illegally break in and enter into a home and eventually shoot down an innocent man because they suspected it of being a drug house. We don't want these things to happen where officers can intrude upon people's home or can intrude upon their space, or they can approach them in their car and pull out the gun because apparently there's outstanding toll violations. We must consider things like the severity. May I continue? We must consider things like the severity of the crime, whether the person was being compliant, like Mr. Brooks was, and whether the individual posed any threats to the officer, which Mr. Brooks did not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Wow. So that concludes debate for this evening. But let's hear it one more time. We just gotta get out of here. So I am gonna turn it over to our sponsors and give the floor to Tom to announce our top three, starting with number 3.
Okay,
so person
I'm gonna
in
be
third
quick.
place.
But you guys all did amazing. I really am so impressed with how well you guys did. And I know it's a lot of work, but it paid off because each of you were poised and you were confident and you knew the record and you knew your arguments and you were persuasive and you each got questions that I thought like, no, that's gonna get them. And you had really good answers. I thought, oh, that's pretty good. So keep at it, and really congratulations, because it was wonderful. And for what it's worth, I think that cop was out of control. Anyway, okay, but in third place, do I announce the?
If you'd like. It's up to you.
Well, sure. In third place, and the winner of $650, but more importantly, this trophy, Haley Martinez. Thank you. Can we take a picture? Okay.
Haley, just stand off to the side.
Oh, okay.
In second place, winning $750, Joelle Pauline. And in first place, our three-peat champion, Jessica.
Yes, let's take